Alright, in this video we'll explore Hotwire, a suite of front-end frameworks that are shipped with Rails 7. We'll compare it with other ways of building web applications and see the benefits it provides over them. To understand Hotwire, we first need to understand how a typical request-response cycle works when a browser requests a web page. When you go to a website in the browser or click a link on a page, it makes a GET request to the server, which sends an HTML response to the requesting browser. The browser then parses the HTML text and displays the web page. This causes a full reload of the page that you are on. For example, here's a simple website, and if I type the link in the address bar and hit enter, the browser makes a connection to the server and requests the HTML response, and the server sends it, and the browser then interprets and displays the response from the server. If we want to see the request, we can open the DevTools, go to the Network tab, and let's click a link this time. So you can see it created a request for JavaScript, and the server sends an HTML response back. In the headers tab, you can see the request method is get, and the response from the server is 200, which means everything is okay. So once the browser receives the response, it parses the HTML and interprets the response to show this web page here. When the browser reloads the page, it throws away any existing HTML and starts reading the new HTML from the response. It also fetches any assets that are mentioned in the HTML, such as JavaScript or HTML or CSS files, and fetches them again. Now, most of the time, these assets are cached on the browser, so it's relatively fast. But the basic idea is the same. The browser has to parse and interpret the whole HTML again. Now, this was the original web architecture, and many web applications still work that way. However, a new category of web applications became really popular in the last 10 years, known as single-page applications, or SPAs for short. These applications make heavy use of JavaScript, using frameworks like React, Vue, or Ember. Now, what these JavaScript frameworks do is that instead of fetching HTML response from the server, they ask for the JSON data, interpreting and rendering the data on the front end. The browser doesn't have to reload the whole page. JavaScript does all the heavy lifting. And the original page that first loads when you go to that application URL, it contains all the JavaScript to make that application work, and it behaves like a desktop application. Hence, these websites are called single page application. A really good example of a single page application is the Rails forum, which is powered by Discourse. It's a single page application, and when I click on a message, and keep an eye on this tab here, when I click on a message, you can see it didn't reload like the MDN documentation did. For example, let's click on a link here, and you can see the browser reloads and fetches the content from the server. In the Rails forum, it's fetching the JSON back from the server. So let's go back, and if I go to the network tab, clear all the previous requests, and let's click on a message, you can see it fetched the JSON from the server. And if we see the response, it's a JSON data that looks something like this, and the JavaScript on this application in the browser that translates all this JSON data into a HTML response and renders it on the front end. So single page applications get a lot of their speed and responsiveness from not constantly reloading the browser, tearing down the application process, only to reinitialize it on the very next page. But there are some disadvantages that come with single page applications, such as when you first load the application, it is slow as you have to load a big JavaScript bundle. Now to solve that, you have to compress and link together all the JavaScript using bundling tool like Webpack, which is not easy. Also, your view templates might be duplicated both on the front end and back end, and Managing and sharing links becomes tricky because you're always on the same page. Now, it's not a problem with Discourse. As you can see, it has a separate link for each page. But yeah, it's also not very SEO friendly. The spas that are poorly implemented, that is. Now, single page applications do try to address these concerns using various techniques, but we won't get into that. Just to be fair, Discourse is a very powerful and sophisticated web application that doesn't have many of these problems, as you can see. But in my opinion, these are exceptions, and most of the single page applications which are poorly implemented are not that good to use and to work with. But again, just a personal opinion. Hotwire is a collection of techniques that tries to get the best of both worlds, keeping the original, simple web architecture of sending HTML from the server while not losing the performance benefits of single page applications. Hotwire stands for HTML over the wire. It's an alternative approach to building modern web applications without using much JavaScript by sending HTML instead of JSON over the wire. This makes for fast first load pages, keeps template rendering on the server, and allows for simpler, more productive development experience in any programming language. And you keep the speed and the responsiveness uh, that you get from single page applications. Now, these are pretty solid advantages. I've been playing with Hotwire for the past few days and can confirm these benefits. Working on a Hotwire application is just fun. There's no complexity associated with setting up the framework like React or having to configure Webpack, which I never enjoyed. You write Ruby and as little JavaScript as possible, and your application just works. It's also much simpler and easier to reason about and understand the whole application instead of having to maintain separate front end and back end teams. So Hotwire is not a single framework. It's a suite of different frameworks. There is Strata, which is not yet released. There is Stimulus, which is a JavaScript framework that you use when you absolutely need to use JavaScript. And finally, there is Turbo. It's the most important framework of Hotwire. Turbo uses different techniques to reduce the amount of JavaScript most web applications have to write. It has Turbo Drive, Turbo Frames, Turbo Streams, and Turbo Native. We'll learn about all of them in the next few videos. If all these different frameworks and techniques are already sounding confusing, don't worry. You won't be using all of them equally. Um, Here's a diagram that might help you understand how it all fits together. So here we have Hotwire. It's made up of Turbo, Stimulus, and Strata. As you can see, Turbo is the bedrock of Hotwire and makes the majority of Hotwire framework. When you need to work with some JavaScript, you use Stimulus, and you only need Strata when your application needs to have native apps on Android and iOS. Inside Turbo, Turbo Drive will satisfy most of your needs of fast performance. When you need additional responsiveness, you use Turbo Frames. And finally, a few cases where you need to bring your application alive, such as sending live updates from the server, you'll use Turbo Streams. Now we'll learn about all these techniques in future videos. For now, I hope this brief introduction helped you understand Hotwire and how it compares against traditional web applications. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please let me know in the comments. I look forward to your feedback.